I'm the King of the Castle is a novel by Susan Hill, published in 1970. Psychological Gothic horror novel is set in Warings house, in the village of Durn in England. It is from the third-person limited point of view shifting between characters' perspectives. The novel begins after his father's death. Joseph Hooper moves into his father's mansion called Warings. He brings his 10-year-old son, Edmund Hooper, with him. Edmund's mother, Ellen, passed away 6 years earlier, and Edmund finds Warings dull and lonely. The only thing that interests him is the Red Room, which holds the family's large collection of moths. Feeling isolated after his wife's death, Joseph invites Helena Kingshaw to Warings to act as an informal live-in housekeeper. Helena arrives with her 11-year-old son, Charles Kingshaw. Right from the start, Edmund and Charles dislike each other. Edmund mocks Charles for being from a working-class family and, after learning that Charles's father is dead, criticizes him for failing to support his family. In front of the adults, Edmund pretends to be kind to Charles, but in private, he bullies him cruelly. Knowing that Charles is terrified of birds, Edmund places a stuffed crow in his bed, leaving Charles too scared to move. He also locks Charles in the Red Room, aware of his fear of moths. As Helena and Joseph grow closer, Charles decides to escape Warings. He secretly packs food and a flashlight, planning to run away into the nearby woods. However, Edmund figures out his plan and warns Charles that he will follow him wherever he goes. When Helena and Joseph go to London for the day, Charles seizes the chance to flee into the forest but soon realizes that Edmund has followed him. While Edmund is frightened by the dark woods and the unfamiliar animals, he continues to bully Charles. Edmund claims that Helena and Joseph will marry soon, making it clear to Charles that Edmund will always have control over him. Charles ventures deeper into the woods, searching for a way out. When he returns, he finds Edmund face down in a stream and saves his life. The next morning, search parties find both boys and bring them back to Warings. Back home, Edmund lies and tells Joseph and Helena that Charles pushed him into the stream. Helena believes Edmund and scolds Charles for running away. Furious and feeling misunderstood, Charles refuses to explain what really happened. Edmund's bullying worsens as he locks Charles in a shed, and Charles dreads being sent to the same boarding school as Edmund, where Edmund is popular and promises to make his life miserable. Meanwhile, Helena and Joseph continue to grow closer. One day, they take the boys to an old Laydell castle in the countryside. At the top of the castle, Edmund, afraid of heights, loses his balance and falls, breaking several bones. Even though Charles tried to help him, Helena again blames Charles for the accident. While Edmund is in the hospital, Charles enjoys some freedom and makes a new friend, Anthony Fielding, a confident working-class boy. Fielding tells Charles not to be afraid of Edmund, reminding him that Edmund can't really hurt him. However, Charles resents how much time Helena spends visiting Edmund in the hospital. When Joseph finally proposes to Helena, Edmund returns to Warings, bedridden. Helena forces Charles to spend time with Edmund, who continues to find ways to intimidate and scare him. Though Edmund enjoys the attention from Helena, he doesn't genuinely care for her. Charles sneaks away to spend time with Fielding, his only friend. But when Helena finds out, she invites Fielding over for tea with Edmund, which enrages Charles. He feels like he's losing his only friend and the one part of his life that Edmund doesn't control. Soon after, Joseph and Helena announce their engagement, meaning Charles and Edmund will become stepbrothers. During the tea, Fielding remains calm even as Edmund tries to intimidate him. Charles is frustrated that Edmund treats Fielding differently and seems powerless to stop it. Angry and defeated, Charles isolates himself from both Fielding and Edmund. The night before they're set to leave for boarding school, Charles sneaks out of Warings. Filled with anger toward Helena, Edmund, and himself, he returns to the woods, the only place where he ever felt at peace. There, at the same stream where he once saved Edmund, Charles drowns himself. The next day, his body is found. When Edmund hears about Charles's death, he feels victorious, believing he caused it. Helena hugs Edmund, and he breathes in her perfume, satisfied with his victory. Let's thematically analyze I'm the King of the Castle by Susan Hill. When Joseph Hooper inherits Warings, a crumbling Victorian mansion, he feels like he has finally become the master of his own world. Wanting someone to help maintain the house and look after his son, Edmund, Joseph hires Mrs. Helena Kingshaw. To Joseph's delight, she brings along her son, Charles, who could be a playmate for Edmund. However, Edmund doesn't see things the same way. With his father often absent, Edmund has grown used to being in control of Warings and isn't happy about any changes. I'm the King of the Castle explores the dark side of childhood, focusing on how cruel children can be to one another. Edmund quickly decides to make Charles's life miserable. He invents twisted ways to scare and torment him, like hiding a stuffed crow in his bed. Edmund's goal is to drive Charles away, not realizing that Charles already wants nothing more than to escape Warings. Charles soon starts planning to run away. After a failed first attempt, he ventures into Hangwood, with Edmund chasing after him. Once they're both lost in the woods, the power dynamic between them shifts. Edmund, usually so confident and controlling, starts to crack under fear, revealing his vulnerability. A major idea in the story is how often children's voices are ignored. The adults, Joseph Hooper and Helena Kingshaw, are so wrapped up in their own relationship that they neglect to notice the pain and struggles of their children. They're blinded by love, lust, or maybe even the desire for status and wealth, leaving Edmund and Charles to fend for themselves emotionally. Susan Hill also explores the idea of entitlement. When Charles moves into Warings, he immediately notices that he isn't treated the same as Edmund. He feels he deserves just as much attention and affection. So, when his mother gives Edmund more attention or when Edmund steals his model toys, Charles feels deeply wronged and quick to call out the unfairness. On the other hand, Edmund, who is both naturally cruel and spoiled, feels entitled to everything, Warings, his father's attention, and even control over Charles. He believes he has the right to treat Charles however he wants, often acting like Charles is his servant. While Charles just wants a little space to himself to play and be happy, Edmund refuses to let him have even that small freedom. When their needs clash, Edmund usually comes out on top, leaving Charles frustrated, angry, and even fantasizing about hurting or killing Edmund. Edmund's bullying is relentless and psychological. He preys on Charles's fears of birds and dead animals, waging a mental war that leaves Charles constantly on edge. Edmund seems to instinctively know exactly what will terrify Charles the most, and because he lacks any sense of empathy, he never holds back. Despite this, there are moments when Charles could easily hurt Edmund without facing any consequences. But instead of giving in to these dark thoughts, Charles often chooses to do the right thing. For instance, when Edmund falls into a stream and nearly drowns, Charles pulls him out and saves his life. Still, throughout the story, Charles can't help but imagine pushing Edmund down the stairs or wishing over and over again that Edmund would just die, showing the toll that Edmund's cruelty has taken on him. Edmund is more than just a typical bully. His cruelty is deeply disturbing and shows signs of sociopathic behavior. He enjoys making Charles miserable, not through physical violence but through emotional and psychological manipulation. Edmund manipulates Charles's fears, pushing him to the brink of despair. His bullying is so relentless that Charles eventually feels death is the only escape from becoming Edmund's stepbrother. Charles struggles with overwhelming fear throughout the story. The things that scare him, a tree, a stuffed bird, a moth, might seem minor, but Charles's imagination magnifies them into terrifying nightmares. One example is when Edmund leaves Charles a simple note that reads, "Something will happen to you." The message is vague and could mean anything, but Charles allows it to consume him with fear. Eventually, Charles drowns himself, fulfilling the ominous threat in Edmund's note. Interestingly, Edmund is also easily scared. When climbing an old castle, he becomes so anxious about falling that he panics and loses his balance, causing him to fall. He doesn't fall because of the danger itself, but because his fear overwhelms him. The difference between the boys is that Edmund is more confident and aggressive. He knows how to use Charles's fears against him. Even when Charles realizes Edmund is manipulating him, he can't stop himself from feeling afraid. This is especially clear when they go into the woods. Edmund is actually more frightened than Charles, but he still manages to dominate and control him by preying on Charles's deep-seated fears. Warings, the grand mansion where the story takes place, represents the rigid English class system. It shows how some children, like Edmund, are born into privilege, inheriting wealth and property, while others, like Charles, have no such advantages. For Charles, Warings feels hostile and unwelcoming. At times, it seems to loom over him, making him feel small and unwelcome, and at other times, it feels like a trap, locking him inside its dark, eerie rooms. The house fills Charles with fear, but for Edmund, who will inherit it, Warings feels like a safe, comforting place. To Edmund, it symbolizes his family, his heritage, and his place in society. For the local villagers, Warings represents status. The Hoopers only became significant in the village after Warings was built. They didn't come from old wealth, their family had only owned the house for 100 years. So, the mansion wasn't just a home, it was a symbol of their rise in society, proving they were now respectable, upper-class people. Hope you comment and share for more videos.